Hi, I'm Bill Mills. Welcome to the Spyder maintenance video. Today we're going to be talking about the Kingman International Spyder semi-automatic paint gun. We'll be going over how to assemble it straight out of the box, how to disassemble it completely for maintenance, for cleaning, as well as how to assemble it again afterwards, and some of the options that are available to you as a new Spyder owner to upgrade it for better performance, faster rate of fire, or to make it a little more comfortable for you. To start with, we're going to take a straight Spyder as it comes out of the box. First thing you do when you get it, this is important even if it's a gift for someone else in your family, take it out, make sure everything's in part of the box because you've got a limited time on your warranty, so you want to make sure everything's there and in good shape. First thing you'll need is the Spyder maintenance manual, which has a diagram of the various parts that are inside so you can name them if you have to have any replaced, as well as a note place for you to mark warranty information. This is really important. You've got to keep track of your sales receipt in case you need any parts replaced under warranty. There's also a piece of packing foam which once you're out of the box you won't need anymore. The Spyder itself, the receiver, the hand grip, and the CO2 supply. The Spyder's barrel. The ammunition hopper that holds the paintballs. And there's a bag of assorted parts. In this bag you should find a smaller bag with some O-rings and various valve seals. There's a replacement plastic cover for the side of the receiver. 2 different size Allen wrenches. These are important. These are the 2 tools that are needed to completely disassemble the Spyder for replacement of seals. And a barrel plug. The barrel plug's key because when you take the paint gun out to a field and you're going to use it, it's required by most fields as a safety device to block the end of the barrel when you're in areas where players aren't using full face and head protection, like the parking lot or getting the staging area where you buy your paint. So to put the Spyder together, quick several steps here. You start with the barrel plug because we're not wearing eye and face protection at the moment. The barrel plug fits in the end of the barrel. You'll see there are 2 sizes here. One slips in rather easily. This size is meant if you have another barrel, if you go to an aftermarket barrel where the bore ends directly at the end of the muzzle. The Spyder barrel itself has a built-in muzzle brake. It gets a little overbore here. That helps disperse the gases when you fire, so the ball's more stable coming out. But since this is wider, you use the wider end of the barrel plug, so it'll fit snugly. And now if any paintballs are accidentally shot out, they're just going to break harmlessly against the plug. The barrel screws directly into the front of the receiver. It's very simple. Slip it in. And screw to a tight, snug fit. The hopper that holds the paintballs fits directly on the feed tube and can be wedged in and adjusted to an angle that's comfortable for you to hold the paintballs. And from there you're very much ready to go. This is ready to insert CO2 and fire. The steps for that involve pulling back the cocking knob. This is important because if the cocking knob is against the valve when you put in the CO2, it's going to leak down the barrel. A CO2 canister like this 12 ounce screws into the bottom line adapter. And you can hear there will be a hiss as it goes all the way in. And that hiss is now the gas charging in through the gas line up into the valve. When the Spyder's used, there are 2 main components to the valve's operation. As we pull the trigger, you can see for a brief moment there, the hammer flies forward, strikes the valve, which is inside here, and a small amount of gas is released out the back, which pushes the hammer back, recocking for your next shot, while another jet of gas goes up in through the bolt and fires, pushing the paintball down the barrel. When you're done with play for the day, you unscrew the tank. You'll notice at the bottom of the air adapter there's a small hole here. This is where the gas is going to vent out of the tank. And this is important to keep an eye where that's facing as you unscrew this, because some CO2 is going to come bursting out of there. A quick little jet. Once it's done that, the tank's already closed its little internal valve, and we're ready to go. Now there are two different models of the Spyder also. This is the standard Spyder right here. We also have the Spyder Compact. You can see the barrel is a little bit shorter. And instead of the bottom line setup, the CO2 attaches vertically in the Spyder Compact. And this actual, there are two models of the Spyder Compact as well. This is the Compact A. The difference being all of this grip frame area is made out of metal. On the Spyder Compact, this is plastic. The Compact A is a little bit more cost involved over the Spyder Compact, but you're saving in the long run because you're buying a more durable product. This vertical bottle has a couple advantages. Chief amongst which you're feeding gaseous CO2, you're not feeding alternately liquid and gas, as liquid can sometimes splash up through the hose system on the standard Spyder, and as well as the compact feel of it. A lot of people like in close quarters paintball, if you're in small speedball courts, that type of thing, you get a little more mobility with the shorter barrel and the bottle not being in the back. When you get to the paintball field, before the day's play starts, and anytime you've done any maintenance on the Spyder, such as changing the barrel or stripping it down during the day while you're playing, it's important that you set the velocity. The velocity is the speed at which the pellets come out of the barrel, and it's important that that be kept under 300 feet per second for player safety. Velocity is adjusted on the Spyder in the back here with the velocity adjustment screw. One of the Allen wrenches, the larger of the two that comes packaged with the Spyder, fits into this screw, and by turning clockwise, the screw goes in further and it increases pressure on the mainspring. What that does is it makes the hammer hit harder, which holds the valve open a little bit longer, causing more gas to push the pellet out faster. So if you need to decrease the velocity, you back off the screw. Now if you've run into a large fluctuation where you've got the velocities too low, say you're only shooting 120 feet per second, you're trying to get up to 280. Velocity screw is screwed all the way in. There's another adjustment in the front. And it's important anytime you come near this that you have no CO2 attached to the system, because the front valve plug is under pressure through the whole system. So you have to make sure to take off your tank before doing any adjustment up here. Your rear velocity screw, that's fine. You can be pressured up, fire across the chronograph, make an adjustment, fire across the chronograph. But this front plug screw, you've got to have the system completely degassed before you can adjust it. With a straight slot screwdriver, you can back this plug out a quarter turn or half turn. You've got to make sure that it doesn't extend past the edge where it's flush, because then it's going to come shooting out. That's no good. But you just want to make a slight adjustment to it. And this changes the pressure on the valve spring. Whereas before we're changing the pressure on the hammer spring, which controls how hard we hit the valve. Adjusting the valve spring controls how much pressure there is to keep the valve closed. So in this case, you get more velocity by backing this screw out, because now the valve will stay open longer. Now this makes a pretty big change. So this is something you probably only do maybe going from winter to summer as temperatures change and affect the CO2 pressure. On the daily basis, when you're out at the field, you're going to do your velocity adjusting with the velocity screw in the back. Now before you start any maintenance work or tear down on the Spyder, it's important that you have the right tools. The large Allen wrench packed with the Spyder we use for velocity. The small Allen wrench, this is important because this is for all the screws that hold everything together if you're going to strip it in the field or replace an O-ring or valve seal. You'll need a straight slot screwdriver and a Phillips screwdriver, carry them both in one. A small crescent wrench or box end wrench for the appropriate size. A pick, this can be, you can use a small jeweler's screwdriver, you can use a bent paper clip, something along those lines, or you can order in spare parts kits from a lot of paintball suppliers, little dental picks. These are great for pulling the O-rings off of the parts inside. A squeegee, this is good when you need to move parts out along through the receiver, and you need it on the field if you get a ball breaks in your barrel. This will clean it out for you. And we'll also need oil. There are varying oils you can use on the paint guns, varying from 3-in-1 oil to auto lube to gold cup oil. There's a whole slew. Your paintball supplier will be able to help you out picking oil that you think is right for you. Okay, so let's open the Spyder. Clear these tools off to the side, except what we need. And we'll start with take down of the barrel, which is exactly the opposite of how we placed it inside. Unscrews, and it can set off to the side. We'll start by taking off the sight rail because that's a major step in getting the bolt out. Using the small Allen key, remove the screw from the top. This takes off the sight rail, and you'll notice there's a small lock washer inside, which you don't want to lose. That needs to stay on the Allen screw itself. We'll set the sight rail aside. As soon as you do that, the back plug will be free to slide right out into your hand. And now you can look inside and you'll be able to see, if you're looking in, the back of the bolt itself, which is the part that moves back and forth, chambering the paintball into the barrel. A lot of people don't actually keep this part in. If they're not using the sight rail, this also becomes a very convenient storage spot for your barrel plug. So you've got your barrel plug in the barrel, you go out to play, and you can stick your barrel plug in the back. It's a handy little storage tip for you. Now the other two screws that we need to get out of the back are from the hammer plug. It's important that we let the hammer come forward. You have to be off the safety. Let the hammer come forward so that the spring is not under pressure, otherwise the hammer plug is going to come shooting out the back. These two screws also have lock washers, so you want to keep those with the screws. And I like to keep a thumb pressure on this because even with the hammer uncocked, there's going to be a little bit of spring tension. And I don't want to lose any parts. As I release that, you'll see the springs pushing it out. Out comes the back plug for the lower part of the receiver, a small metal disc, and the plastic spring guide. And it's important that you don't lose this metal disc. It's a small, easy to disappear part, but it protects the back of the spring guide from the velocity adjustment screw. The velocity adjustment screw presses against it, and the spring guide is what actually moves forward and back, changing the spring pressure when you're adjusting your velocity. The main spring slides right out, and I'll use the pick to pull out the rubber bumper from the back. Just get a hook on it and slide it out. And this rubber bumper is what the hammer runs into every time the gun cocks itself to reduce wear on the parts. Now the only thing keeping us from sliding out the bolt and the hammer as one unit is the bolt cocking knob. And that unscrews by hand. Now there we have the hammer and the bolt ready to slide out. Again, the pick, which is a very handy tool for working with paint guns, we'll slide those right out the back. And we have the bolt and the hammer. They're connected by a connecting pin. This is just loose into the hammer, so the hammer will drop away. And it's connected permanently into the bolt. With a small Allen key, you can remove it if you have to for some reason. And now, we can see clean straight through the bore. This is important. This is probably the biggest thing you're going to do in general maintenance. If you get paint shells caught inside that jam up the bolt from a broken paintball, this is typically the farthest you'll need to go to clean it. and from this point a squeegee passed through with the rag end is going to wipe that out, get it all clean for you, and you'll be ready to go back onto the field in a matter of minutes. Going further, if there were some problems we needed to deal with, we want to take a look at the valve. This is where we need the straight slot screwdriver, the valve plug simply unscrews, and there we have the valve assembly. This is the valve plug, the valve spring, and the cup seal. The valve rod itself, this is the part that gets hit by the hammer, and the cup seal is what gets pressed back to allow gas by for the paint gun to fire. Now to take off the grip, this is where a wrench comes in. Now these different, the connectors on the gas line are going to be different on different model Spyders. Some of the older models, this is a male thread that goes straight into the receiver. The newer models, there's a double male here, and there's some connectors. Models with the connectors are a bit nicer because you don't have to reseal them with Teflon tape every time. They've got their own internal seals. You can unscrew that, it's fairly quick. You'll see inside there's a small nylon washer in there that's used to make the seal. That off, our small Allen can be used in the 2 frame screws. This rear frame screw takes a little bit to get out. It's a tricky one, but a couple minutes work and it comes out for you, along with the front frame screw. Which is a bit easier to get to because you don't have the handle in the way. And both of these also have little star-shaped lock washers. You want to keep an eye on those that they don't disappear. They stay with the screws. And from there, the entire trigger assembly can be removed. And typically this is, again, not a maintenance item you'll have to do very often unless you need to get the valve body out for some reason. And for that, we need a straight screw. There's a small plug here that holds in the actual valve cup itself. Comes out from the bottom of the receiver. That's what holds in the valve cup. We can set that aside. And again, we can use the squeegee, the narrow end, taking out the rag. And we can pull out the cord of the valve itself. And this little cylinder is the center of the valve. You can see where how the valve sets up. The hole in here, this is where the valve screw holds it in place, the valve body lock screw. The hammer strikes the end, pushing the seal back from the cup face, letting the gas through. Now we've completely disassembled all the major parts out of the receiver. The only thing we've left on are the nubbin and the ball stopper. And now we can go to work putting it back together again. If we'd had a leak anywhere along the line, say in the valve body, this is where a pick comes in handy. You can just reach in, fish out one of these O-rings, pull it out to replace it. Now when putting everything back together, we'll go back to our oil. I like to use toilet paper when cleaning paint guns. It's pretty handy for wiping paint off of the surfaces, cleaning everything out. It's not like using a rag that's going to get gunky and have to be worry about wiping things in your goggles or whatnot later. But I also like to use it to apply oil. It's important that you make sure that your parts are well oiled, but you don't want it so much that you've got oil leaking into your barrel and gumming up the balls in there. So what I like to do is put a little bit of oil on toilet paper, on a cloth or something like that, and just wipe it a little bit over the seals. So before we put it back in the valve O-ring, or the valve body here, we'll wipe it down. Make sure it's got a nice light coat of oil on it. It's important, very important here, that you remember which way this goes, because it looks like it can almost go both ways back into the receiver. But Kingman's nicely color-coded this with two different types of O-rings. The black one going towards the back end of the paint gun, which is kind of hard to tell which is which when we've got everything off. But remember, the air is going into the front of the receiver. Another key way to tell, even if you end up switching these O-rings at some time, is to fit the valve seal into the cup face there, and you'll see it will come all the way close, close, and seal. If we had it the wrong way, the little metal neck here is going to keep it from closing. And if you disassembled it like this, you're going to have gas leaking out the barrel of the gun as soon as you put it in the tank. So you'd know immediately something's wrong. Remember, the black end goes towards the back, and you can test that by test fitting the valve cup seal right onto there. It's also important to note these two holes need to be aligned vertically, because that's where the screw holds it into place. So we'll wiggle this in, and you need to do a little wiggling and sliding to get it past the threads in the front. And you want to do it gently so as to not damage the O-rings on the threads. And another part, like the handy pick, can be used to slide it back into place. And you'll feel it, it'll firmly lock into place against this rod that goes across inside the receiver. And looking in through the bottom, we're not quite lined up, and you can use the Allen wrench to make sure the hole lines up in the body of the valve itself with the hole in the receiver. And then drop in the valve screw, the brass valve body screw, and tighten it into place. And as with all the other screws in the receiver, you don't want to over tighten these. You want to get it snug, but that's it. If you really try and torque down on them, you run a risk of stripping out the threads, and if you strip out the threads in your receiver, you're pretty much in the market for a new paint gun. It's not a very easily repaired item. Okay, once we've got the body of the valve back in, we can go again with the valve cup seal from the front. Slide that in. Actually, we want to get a little bit of oil in this front O-ring before it goes in. Slide it in and screw it into place. And this you'll want to screw down about to the position it was before. It doesn't need to go all the way down, and then adjust it to the position where it needs to sit when you're adjusting your velocity. Now, to put the grip frame back on is very simple. It's a simple reverse of the disassembly procedure. You've got your two frame screws, the front and back. First the front, and we'll tighten it down with the Allen key. Then the back. And again, tighten this down. Also remember that these two have the star-shaped lock washers, and those are important. They need to stay in there to keep from the screws accidentally backing out while you're on the field and having it fall off your hand grip. And you want to get those again snug but not over tightened. Now, reconnecting the gas line, if you have a gas line with a small nylon seal in here, this shouldn't be an issue. But if you have an older model where the male threaded hose goes directly into the receiver, or if you are developing a little bit of a leak in this area you might want to use some Teflon tape while reassembling the hose. Teflon tape is available in paintball stores and most hardware stores. And it's just a narrow, thin little bit of tape, and we can tear off a little piece. Doesn't take much. What we'll do is wrap it around the threads we want to seal. And as you pull it tight, you'll see it will deform and tighten on the threads, and it'll just make like a little bit of a coating over the threads. It's important also to make sure that, as I've done here, you don't want to block the gas opening, because then little bits of Teflon tape are going to get in your valve and wreak havoc for you as they get in the way. So fold those little bits back. And now as you rethread it, it's going to fit a little more snugly and provide a gas tight seal. And we can tighten that down with the wrench. And as with everything else where we've got a connection on the receiver, you want to go snug, but you don't want to over tighten. Okay, now that we're back here, we've got the valve in, we've got the grip frame back on. Now we're back to the level of normal field stripping, the things you might have to do to clean in the field to get out a broken paintball or something along those lines. To start with, we're going to make sure that we've got some oil on the hammer. On the hammer's O-ring in the front, because this is the seal that's important for recocking. And on the bolt. The bolt has two O-rings right in the center. And we'll put a light coating on there. And the hammer and the bolt fit together. There's only one large opening in the back of the hammer, so it's pretty simple to get these two aligned. And then they slide straight into the receiver. Now, right at this point where they're flush with the back, they're going to meet a little resistance. That's the sear. It's part of the trigger mechanism. What you need to do is put a light pressure on them and pull the trigger. And that'll let them pass. You have to pull it twice, just like that, and they'll slide in forward. From here, the spring goes back into the center of the hammer, and the bumper goes over the spring and in. Now you can put in the bumper first, you can put in the spring first. That's not really an issue. Then the spring guide goes in the center of the spring. Remembering, important, the little plate. And our hammer actually is still back, so we'll put a little pressure on this and let the hammer go forward so that everything slips into place. And now the rear lower receiver plug will slide in. Again, you see there's a little bit of pressure from the spring there. And our two side screws, these each with little split lock washers, go in to hold it into place. And they're tightened down with a small Allen key. And finally, the top receiver plug, the sight rail, and the top receiver plug screw go into place. Also tightened in with the Allen key. Like so. And the very last item is the cocking knob, which screws in just finger tight, like so. Now you're ready to go. Now for troubleshooting to help spot and correct some problems you might run into using your Spyder. The first trouble you might run into is the cocking knob falling out, because it's only held in by finger pressure and there isn't a lock washer like the other screws. First, easiest thing to do about this is make a habit of, when you're on the field, tighten it. When it's cocked and you're playing in between shots, there's a lull, make the conscious habit of just keeping it tight. Then you don't run into a situation where it's falling out on the field, something happens and you can't recock your marker. The other solution, which can be used in conjunction with this first one, is covering these threads in Teflon tape. A very small amount. This is the same tape we use for sealing the gas lines if they need it. A very small piece, folded over because there isn't much area of threads on the screw. Fold it over to half width, wrapped around those threads. Will give a little bit of a tighter fit into the hammer. And we just screw that back into the hammer. It's important that you don't use too much of the tape, otherwise you're not actually going to get it to screw in. You'll fill the threads up too much. But as you can feel when it goes in, there's a lot more friction on it. And you may have a little bit of excess rubbing out against the receiver here. That really isn't a bad thing because there's very low friction on the Teflon. And once that's in, it'll be ready to go. Make sure that the hammer and bolt are moving smoothly, and you should feel your cocking knob fit a little tighter, be less likely to fall out. A problem people sometimes run into in the field is called bolt stick. That's where the bolt and hammer get stuck in the forward position. Usually this results from a broken paintball that's been in the receiver somewhere, and the gelatin fragments get stuck between the bolt and the receiver. Now if you can, work it back. It may just not be able to recock because of it, or you may have trouble actually getting the hammer and bolt back. If you can't get the hammer and bolt back, that means you're not going to be able to take it apart to clean it. If that's the case, you'll need to unscrew the barrel, pour some water in the receiver area, again with the gas supply completely removed, as with any time you're disassembling the Spyder, and let that water seep in, and what it will do is soften the gelatin shell. Then you can, once you can move the bolt, you can go through the disassembly procedure we covered to remove the front and back plugs and take out the barrel, the bolt assembly and the hammer, and you can clean out the receiver, clean the bolt, clean the hammer, give them a light coat of oil, put them back in, and you're going to be ready to go. If you're having problems getting the velocity high enough on your Spyder, there are a couple of routes to go. First, remember the front valve plug. Loosening this out a little bit with no gas supply on the gun, loosen this out a little bit. That should give you a little more velocity when you go back to check and adjust with your velocity adjuster. The reason being is that you'll be decreasing the strength on the valve spring while the hammer strikes against it, so it can hold the valve open a little bit longer. Now, some older Spyders have a weak mainspring, and that's failed over time. Kingman has replaced this. If you contact them, you can get the replacement part. You may have a hammer spring that's been weakened with time, even if it's a newer model. If your hammer spring's been weakened too much, replacing that can make a difference to bring your velocity back up. Also, low gas flow could be a problem. First of all, if your CO2 tank is getting near empty, you're not going to have enough CO2 to fire and recock the system. You may also have a problem in your gas lines. If we look down at the bottom of the gas line here, I need to use a wrench to open it to find out. Taking off the top. And unscrewing the bottom, we'll find that in the bottom line adapter, there's a small copper filter. You can pull this out with a pick. There are O-rings in front of and behind the copper filter elements. We can just tap that right out. And if this little copper filter gets clogged, that's going to decrease the airflow into your marker as well. And that too can result in a low velocity from gas not getting in fast enough to fire, as well as recocking problems where there may not be enough gas supply to actually come back and cock the hammer. Now again, Kingman's using O-rings here to seal this. If you have a leak in this area, you may want to put some Teflon tape on those threads as well, just to be on the safe side. Now, since the Spyder Compact doesn't have the front valve plug to adjust, you may need to make some adjustments to the spring to increase your velocity. The spring itself can be cut just a little bit so you've got less pressure on the valve holding it shut. If you're going to do this, remember, if you cut too much, you're not going to be able to bring your velocity back down. So it's probably a good idea to buy one or two of these springs to have on hand as spares if you're going to try this modification. If after you screw in your CO2 supply you hear a leaking sound somewhere in the marker, then you'll need to determine first where the leaking is coming from. Now if you unscrew the barrel, you'll be able to hear almost straight away if the CO2 is leaking out of the barrel area. If that's the case, you probably have a leak in the valve itself. So by unscrewing the front valve plug with the CO2 supply removed from the marker, you can have access to that valve cup seal. You have a spare one that comes in the spare parts kit with the marker in case that's nicked or shows any signs of wear or damage. You can just replace it. The same goes for the O-rings that are in the valve body. If you hear a leaking out near the hammer area, that means you probably have a leak in that back O-ring in the valve body. If you have a leak anywhere in the hoses, it could be one of the O-rings that are around the filters down here, or it could be the little flat plastic disc that's up here. Either way, that can be cured by replacing those seals or by wrapping some Teflon tape around the threads. Now, if you find that your Spyder's often breaking paint in the bolt, which can lead to bolt stick problems, you want to cure that by making sure you're not double feeding balls. Take a look at the nubbin. The small black panel here, held in by these two Phillips screws, holds a small piece of rubber called a nubbin. And what that does is lets only one ball at a time load into the breech. If it's missing or damaged, you could have more than one ball loading in halfway, another loads halfway on top of it. It gets cut in half when you fire. You could have two balls loading, they break in the barrel. Or if it's dirty, it could be breaking the balls itself. Once this panel comes off, you'll see it. It's a small black piece of rubber. And you want to clean out all this area. And this is also a good idea in general maintenance. When you've taken out the bolt for oiling and cleaning, you can take off the nubbin panel and make sure your nubbin's clean and safe inside. There are a number of aftermarket accessories available that will let you increase the performance of your Spyder and or just customize it to your own personal taste. One of the first things people usually add is a larger loader. The small 40 round loader is fairly limited compared to loaders available now in as many as 200 or 300 round capacities. The large flip top means you can load in balls a lot faster when you're reloading in the field, so you're not stuck during downtime. By adding a sight, you can make sure your first shot counts and help conserve the paint you're shooting. This sight, for example, sees well over the power feed. That's important. You may need to check when you're looking for a sight to make sure, one, that it fits exactly on the 3/8" sight rail, and two, that it will clear the power feed. If it doesn't clear the power feed, you can look into raised sight rails, which go on the existing sight rail, raising up your sight to see over it. Barrels are another common upgrade, probably the next most common to getting a large hopper, and there are a number of companies that make them and a number of materials. You can look at barrels usually in aluminum or stainless steel. Stainless steel is a bit heavier than aluminum, but it has an advantage of a stronger finish that's a bit more friction free. And there are various models available with venting either just in the end like these two, or throughout the length of the barrel. If you find a model that's vented through the length of the barrel, it's probably going to operate a lot more quietly. So if that's important to you sneaking around to your style play, that's something you might want to look for. To increase gas efficiency and keep liquid CO2 from entering the valve, which would cause fluctuation in your velocity, you can install an expansion chamber in the CO2 line. What that does is trap liquid CO2 and change it to gas before it gets into the valve. Also, to smooth out the pressure of the gas, to keep the velocity also more consistent, which affects your accuracy, you can add a regulator in line. And when you install a regulator, you can first set your velocity up around 310 feet per second, which is too high for normal use. But then you can install the regulator and use that to decrease the gas pressure until you get to around 285 or 300 feet per second that you'll be shooting for use. Another option you can add in are varying back plugs. This back plug here uses a thumb wheel for the velocity adjustment. This makes it easier to dial it in. As you're shooting across the chronograph, you can just tweak the thumb wheel there till you get the velocity you want, and then use an Allen key to lock it in place. And it's important that you lock it in place, otherwise it's going to back out on its own when you fire. The Allen key locking in place also keeps somebody on the field from turning up the velocity too high accidentally, which could lead to injury. Another alternative back plug is this one, which plugs both the top and the bottom, making it field strip faster because you don't have to worry about taking out the sight rail, taking out the top plug, and taking out the bottom plug all at once. In addition to the back plug, we're using field strip screws here, which instead of needing an Allen key, you can just take off by hand. This again makes it much faster to tear down. In addition to the two-block design, makes it faster to tear down, take out the bolt, take out the hammer for cleaning. Some of the different field strip screw sets replace not only the field strip screws on the side here, but also the grip frame, so you can take down much more of the Spyder without having to need to access your tools. Another option you can go to that's really more for feel is replacing the M16 style grip with a 45 style grip, and that removes the little nub that's here that gets in the way of some people's fingers, and it's a more natural feel for some people. It's a very personal choice as to what feels the best. It's important when you're looking for an alternate grip, whether you go with the 45 or Euro grip or some of the other aftermarket grips. If you're putting it on the Spyder, on the compact this doesn't matter, but on the Spyder you need to make sure that the holes on the bottom are the same as in the same pattern as the holes on the bottom of the CO2 adapter. Otherwise it's not going to attach and you're going to run into a problem. You'll need to check with your dealer before you purchase. Well, good luck with your Spyder and have fun.